So, Kim, the piece of it that I think is so traumatic for the Biden coalition, which is the only political coalition in our country's history that defeated Trumpism and Trumpists, is that there is no symmetry. There's no remorse. Mitch McConnell, who referred Donald Trump criminally for prosecution, which he couldn't even do now because of the Supreme Court he had as strong of a hand in shaping as anyone other than Donald Trump, said presidents are immune. They just fell back into line. They already function as though they live in an autocracy and Trump is an autocratic leader. This sort of raw pain and anxiety that I think President Biden's coalition is living in is also this feeling of just how brutally unfair the process is. There's a lot of hatred for the media. I don't know what other word to use. But people should know that the Biden high command is engaging with the media. I mean, this is not a story that's been fabricated, but it is a story that feels deeply unfair to a lot of folks in the Biden coalition.
That may be true. Listen, you're absolutely right that the difference between Republicans and Democrats is that Donald Trump could have fallen unconscious on that stage and still gotten the support of Republicans that he has now. That solid support that allowed him to coast to the nomination. Democrats, listen, it is not my job to be a spokesperson for Democrats. It's my job to say what is needed to protect our democracy from the existential threat that is Donald Trump, and that is voting for Democrats right now. And right now, instead of rallying behind the president or even saying, I support the president or whoever the nominee will be, and in this moment, you have Democrats, not just privately, but publicly bickering and fighting with one another about what should be done now. This far past the primary, when what is the alternative? Nobody is asking. The question is, okay, what if Biden steps aside? What now? Have we seen how Democrats handle open conventions or anything close to that? Do we remember 1968 when Johnson decided not to run again? How did that end? That ended with the election of Richard Nixon. Did we see 1980 when jittery Democrats thought maybe that Ted Kennedy can come to the rescue? How did that end? With the inauguration of Ronald Reagan. Even in 2016, not an open convention, Hillary Clinton won it. I was there in Philadelphia when you had so many Bernie Sanders delegates booing and crying and kvetching as she accepted the nomination, many of those doing things like voting for Jill Stein. And how did that end? With the election of Donald Trump. Jill Stein got more votes in Michigan than the difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in that state. Democrats don't do that well. What Democrats need to do is take a page from Republicans and say, we understand the existential threat that we are facing. We are seeing a presidential candidate who already is saying he will be a dictator from day one and who believes, falsely, but he believes it, that the Supreme Court just gave him absolute immunity. We have a president who cognitively bragged about being able to say person, man, woman, camera, TV, but who stood on television and told everyone to inject disinfectant and is now doing campaign rallies about, I don't know, electrical currents and sharks. And nobody is doing an hour-long press conference asking him about that, the way we saw the hour-long press conference asking 1,000 ways about Joe Biden's cold. Democrats need to buck up, look at the threat, and fight against that threat and stop fighting against each other. Our democracy depends on it, and time is up.
Kim, I'm going to need you to say a little more.
Listen, it's just really frustrating because I understand what people saw in that debate. And I understand exactly what Matt said. What that did was confirm a narrative. But who spun that narrative about Joe Biden not being fit for the job? Republicans did. His opponents did. And what Democrats are doing now is confirming that based on their reactions to what's happening. Listen, I get donors with all their money who get jittery when polls move. And I even also get elected lawmakers who are so focused on their own reelections and being down ballot from Joe Biden that they may not be acting completely rationally. But we need everyone, including the press, to speak very clearly about the threat that we are facing. And that is a threat to democracy itself. Have we forgotten that Donald Trump fomented an insurrection? Have we forgotten that he has been found by a court to be a sexual abuser? Have we forgotten all of the racist, xenophobic, and nonsensical things he has said? Have we forgotten how fearful he was when when he was at the helm of a pandemic response? And most importantly, for Democrats, have we forgotten that they have a candidate who has had a successful administration, who has seen wages rise, who has seen inflation fall? Yes, it's not fast enough for everybody. It's not perfect. Our economy is not perfect. But I remember during the Trump administration when every economist was promising us that we would have a post-pandemic recession. Guess what? We didn't have any. Guess what? People had their student loans forgiven. Guess what? We have fewer border crossings right now when Republicans refuse to back border security because Donald Trump told them not to. We also have a vice president who we haven't even mentioned yet, Kamala Harris, who stands ready should anything, God forbid, happen to Joe Biden. She stands ready to step in. She will stand ready to step in next term, too. And all of this talk about him stepping aside because he can't perform 4 more years is tremendously disrespectful to her. What I want is for Democrats to get a grip and to fight. That is what this moment needs, not hand-wringing and public bickering about this.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.